Dr. B, it is always so good to see you. Here we are about to start yet another school year with a ton of uncertainty. It is so stressful on so many families. Tell me what you're seeing in your practice.
Yeah, I completely agree, Christine. I mean, I think all of us would agree it's been kind of a quick, short summer, but it has been a long, long year, hasn't it? So
Yes.
back to school transitions are tough for a lot of families in the best of circumstances every year. But this year in particular, with the pandemic, we are seeing really high levels of stress right now.
Okay, let's talk about some of the triggers for kids when it comes to anxiety. I thought it was so interesting. You know, my youngest, Kate, is kind of an old soul. I told her I was talking to you today, and I said, do you have any questions for Dr. B about anxiety? And she goes, oh, I feel anxious all the time. And I'm like, okay, wait, what? Stop, stop right there.
Yeah.
And so I was like, let's talk about it. So honestly, diving into some of the triggers is so important, I imagine.
It is. And, there's two main triggers for anxiety, Christine. The first one has to do with safety or separation.
Yeah.
And after so many months of togetherness, there's a lot of kids right now who are worried about leaving the comfort zones of their homes. They're worried if it's safe to do this, if it's safe to be around other people. So that's one trigger. The other trigger for anxiety has to do with performance issues. So after this many months of not having a consistent routine, I think it's natural to assume that we're going to have some kids who may have a harder time adapting back. But I have some kids who worry if they'll be able to do it at all, even if they did really well before this pandemic hit us. So those are the two main triggers. But just like your daughter said, let's face it, right now, there is just tension across the board. So anxiety's in the air and kids are picking up on that.
Dr. B, that is just heartbreaking. You know, there's some kids who maybe are more particularly vulnerable to anxiety. What are you seeing, and who is this group, I should say?
Well, I think we should start off and say we've all gone through a year and a half of really unusual challenges. So the truth is any child right now could be feeling more worried or more tense. But there are some kids. There are kids, for example, who always had kind of an anxious temperament or an anxious tendency. They may be more prone to worrying. And then, Christine, there's some kids who during the pandemic and during the quarantine and virtual schooling, in some ways liked a little bit of that. Kids who were bullied in school, kids who have social anxiety, kids who have learning differences. They may have preferred being at home because there was a way to work at their own pace and within their own comfort zone. So those are some kids that may be really worried right now about going back.
Okay, so we need to keep an eye on those kids as well as all of us. I mean, my gosh, it's just so much to think about, and you've got great tips for parents and how we can help our kids right now.
Yes. And I think the first thing to start with is go ahead and validate their feelings. We want to listen to our children. We want them to know that there's a safe space for them to talk about their emotions. And I think it's really important to let them know that it is okay to not be completely okay right now, but that we are going to get through this together. So that's the first thing to do. I'd say the next thing to do is to really set the tone. There's a lot of parents right now who themselves are very anxious.
Exactly.
And if you lead by anxiety, you're going to fuel anxiety. So check in with your own feelings before you talk to your child, and then stay calm, keep an even tone, and answer their questions in a concise, reassuring sort of way. So that's really important to do as well. And then I would say help them to think positive. Anxiety will make us what if the worst case scenarios. So we got to balance that out with real positivity. So ask them what they're looking forward to with the school year starting. Ask them who they want to see again, those sort of things. So helping the child think positive is really important. And then for those kids who are worried about safety, emphasize the safety measures.
Yeah.
Let them know that schools have been planning for months on how to minimize their risk. And that's why there's certain rules now in place. Anxious kids like rules and they like plans that helps them to feel more secure. For the kids who are worried about being away from home, practice separating. Take small steps that help them to see that they can sure enough do this and they can be more and more and more independent. And then these last 2 points almost sound like they're contradictory, Christine, but they actually go together. You want to have a predictable routine, but you do want to encourage flexibility.
Right.
So routine is like a safety net, right? It kind of minimizes the doubt that goes through our minds. But let's face it, there are no guarantees. So we may have to suddenly switch gears. And what you want to say to your child is, there are adults that are monitoring that at all times. So if there is a change in circumstance, we're going to switch gears together as a family and as a community.
Absolutely. You know, now my youngest, or excuse me, my oldest, who goes to private school, she wasn't going to be wearing a mask, but now it's changing by the moment. And I told her, I said, you have got to be flexible. It's going to be okay. You did it last year. We can do it again. And lastly, how do we know if really we should seek professional help?
Yeah, that's a really important question. If you have a child who's having severe meltdowns, or you have a child who's excessively clingy, or you have a child who's having a really hard time recovering from moments where he or she's feeling anxious, or a child who has a hard time even getting to school, that's the time to seek the help of a mental health professional. Find a good therapist who works with children with anxiety. And I'll tell you, that therapist will not only help the child, but he or she will help the parent to express their feelings and come up with some really good coping strategies. But I think the message you just gave your daughter is really important. We've all gone through a really difficult time, but we are already survivors.
Yes.
We're going to do this, and we're going to do it together.
Absolutely. Dr. B, thank you so much for your words of wisdom. We so appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed being here.
Oh, thanks so much, Dr. Bhargave. Some real calls to action there for my family meeting tonight. All right.